How do I discern when an expert is giving me good advice or bad advice?
Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast.
I'm Brannon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers.
We're therapists.
And we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin.
Brannon, this will be an interesting topic to talk about today since we're experts in our own field giving advice.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah. Well, you love picking the hard topics.
You're blaming me for this one?
No, maybe we ought to just give a little bit of the backstory as to why we're doing this one right now, and then maybe get into a little discussion about it, because I think it's actually a really good topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of context to this, and you can find it in the media, and it's interesting because a lot of it is people that I know and I've known personally. Tyler, people we've known of for a long time, people who trained us, and so a couple of things have happened just in the last month or so. One is the thing with Jody, and I've talked about Jody before, but she got arrested. She's currently in jail for child abuse, and the evidence is just mounting up against her. And how she's going to get out of that, I'm not quite sure. And I hope that she doesn't. So if you don't know what's going on with Jody was a sex addiction therapist here in Utah County for many years and was successful at tearing apart many families and hurting many people with her counsel and her advice. She was very convincing. She took the culture here and just ran with it and used it in ways that damaged people and hurt people. But she was a therapist. She was a mental health therapist, and people trusted her as that. They thought they were getting good advice and good counsel. And I could give you specifics about some of the counsel she gave, but I'm not going to do that. But like that is batshit crazy stuff. But people believed it because they were going to her for therapy, and she was this expert on betrayal, sex addiction. And then she started becoming, acting as if she was an expert on parenting, which was interesting because she's horrible at that. So that's Jody, right? So there's Jody. She's in jail right now. That happened in the last month. Another person that we know, Maurice, started Sons of Helaman and Men of Moroni. He's been doing that for many years, his group programs for sex addiction. And, we've heard certain things about those groups, and we're not going to get into all of that. But
good things. I've heard good things.
I've heard both.
Yeah.
I've heard both.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a pretty big organization. I'm sure some groups are a lot better than others. But Maurice last week got arrested for some crazy stuff. And
we don't know if it's true or not. Like, these are allegations.
It's true or not, but like you read the article and it's like, what? And so we don't know what's going on with that. Seems quite bizarre. And like, I don't have, a front row seat with that one, Tyler, but it's just interesting that, what were the charges against him?
I think it was, basically that he had, there were a few things that are still remain to be seen, so this is not all 100%, but he was charged basically for abusing a client with PTSD by getting physical with that client inside the office.
Right. Which, is it true that happened or not? We don't know.
We don't know.
But it's bizarre. And then all the news coming out, and I know he's not a therapist, but about Tim Ballard, we don't know what's true there or not.
You don't know what's true, what's not, right?
But it's this awkward, weird thing. It's dividing a lot of people here in Utah because so many people love him, and then so many people are like rolling their eyes, like, who is this fraud? People follow him, believe in him, and then all of a sudden, like, all this stuff comes out. So what's true, what's not? With all three of them, Maurice, Jody, Tim, they all have followings, and people have looked up to them for guidance, to basically live lives of integrity and freedom and peace. Then all of a sudden, like, I think two of them are in jail right now.
Yeah.
And so the discussion we want to have is, how do you discern what's really helpful, and how do you discern, what advice to follow and what advice to not follow, without, just being defensive and resistant to change in therapy, but at the same time, not just drinking in and trusting these experts automatically. Tyler, I could even throw ourselves in there, the betrayed, the addicted, and the expert. People listened to us faithfully and hung their hat on their recovery, for their relationship and everything, on us, the betrayed, the addicted, and the expert. And I'm not going to just blame Ashton and Kobe all for that. I was a part of that as well. And I'm proud of a lot of the work that we did and a lot of the advice that we gave and all those things. And there was a fall from grace. There was by the way,
there's some humanity. There was humanity. Yeah.
Yeah. And it rocked people's world of like, what?
So, Brannon, I'd even say just one step further, listening to this show right now, we're not massive, but we have a little bit of a following too. And I think I would throw us, you and I, Brannon, and our show into the mix with everything else we're talking about too. When it comes to the topic of how do I discern the truth from the help that I'm getting, regardless of where I'm getting it from.
But everything Tyler says is true.
Yeah, I'm right most of the time. In fact, all the time. I am I am the authority. But right. Other than that, whatever Brannon says is subject to like, no, but seriously, like I think that's what we wanted to talk about today, is us as human beings and how we have a propensity to sort of make hero figures, because there's something inside of us that wants that. Number one, we want to be that for somebody else, but number two, we resonate with that. And yet sometimes we maybe take whatever the status is of the hero, and we don't account for the humanity of the hero. And then the gap that's formed when things come out really causes a lot of pain and suffering. And so how do we distinguish and find the truth from the places that we're going to for some of the truth? And how do we learn how to make sure we make wise decisions and keep our own agency at the end of the day? Right, that's what
Tyler, you think about like, how many people have died in battles, in wars, led by leaders with causes that were somewhat evil.
Yeah.
Right. But those warriors believed they were fighting for good. They believed they were doing the right thing, deceived by a leader who had convinced them to go fight this battle. How many kings, religious leaders, people with power have used that power to gain personally and not really accomplish what they talk about, what they set out to get. Right?
Exactly. I think that's one side of it, right? It's that idea of, when you go to somebody who's an authority on anything, you naturally are going to a place where you're putting yourself in a one down position to the person who's in the one up position of authority, whether that's a medical doctor, whether that's a therapist, whether that's the mechanic at the car shop, whatever else it is. We're relying on the advice of the other person. And on some level, there has to be some basic trust between the two, right, in order for there to be a good relationship there. And that's hard, especially when we live in a world where it's counter to human nature to not give in to the power of things. So, you're familiar with the Milgram studies, but I'll just explain it really quickly. on power and control. This is a research, like famous land breaking like research thing several years ago, where they'd bring people into the laboratory and they'd put them behind a wall, where on the other side of the wall they'd have another participant who was strapped up, in quotes, to this electrical shock thing. And then the person behind the wall had a lab assistant in charge of them and telling them to ask the questions and telling them how often to give the shock. So this person would ask the question. If the answer was wrong through the wall, they'd have to give a shock, and then the shock would get bigger each missed answer. So by the time you finish the quiz, if the person missed too many questions, the person giving the shock was giving what they thought was almost a lethal dose of electricity to the person.
Jeez Louise.
And what they found is that having a person in a lab coat who is posing as this power figure over them could convince most people to deliver what they thought were harmful shocks to somebody else when they missed a question.
Almost a lethal shock, because they're participating in a study. There's a lab coat there. And that lab coat is like, yeah, you just hit that button again. Like,
just
and actually hit it.
They would just say, like, please proceed with the experiment. Please proceed with the experiment. And then they'd like you. If you watch videos of this, it's crazy because people are like, they're losing control of their own bodies, but they're like turning their head and still flipping the switch. You know, they're still just like, but they very few people actually got up and said, this is ridiculous. No. Stop. I'm not doing that. You know? Right. And that's,
isn't that fascinating?
I mean, look at what happened with all of the stuff that happened with some of the things that went through with COVID. How many people, without even questioning anything, just went along with everything they were told, only to find out that a lot of that was terrible advice. Right. But because we can't stand the pressure that's coming from the power, we just succumb to it. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's something that, being aware of that, is the more aware that we become of that, we realize that whenever you go anywhere, when you go to a therapist, when you go to your doctor, when you go to your mechanic, you should go in there and be able to have things filter through your system and still at the end of the day, own your own choice based on your own values.
Yeah. It's easy to say, but it's not human nature.
It's difficult.
I remember sitting in grad school and this teacher started teaching this thing that was very wrong and uncomfortable, but she did it in a way where she was like, I'm the teacher and I'm the authority and I'm teaching, and all of the students started group thinking like, oh yeah, and they started actually like commenting, supporting this whole thing that she was talking about, and I was sitting there uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable, but silent. And this girl next to me raised her hand and basically was like, this is bullshit. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And it was crazy because it changed the whole tide of the room. Like, she gave permission to everybody else like me to be like, yeah, like, right? But if she hadn't actually had the guts to go against what we were all being basically told to think and do, we all probably would have just gone down that road. You know, how many sinking ships do people just hang out on, you know?
Right, exactly. But it took that one person to have the voice that then allowed for other people who had similar values going like, oh wait, something's not quite right here.
Right. You know? I think it's particularly hard, Tyler, if I'm in a vulnerable state where, let's say I need marriage counseling, or I'm depressed, I'm struggling with my mental health. And I go into a therapist who's supposed to be safe, who's supposed to be a professional, and I'm very vulnerable at that time. And that therapist comes and says, I know exactly what you do. Follow me. This is what you do. I have the way. Follow me. Yeah. And they give you really bad counsel and really bad advice. It's really hard to step up in that moment when you're really vulnerable and say, no, yeah, that's right. You're not the one. We're going to go find counsel somewhere else.
Yeah, well, you're right, and then that's where the struggle comes in, right? That's where the big fallouts happen, like some of the things that you mentioned earlier, right? Yeah. So I guess two questions then, Brannon, to go along with this discussion we're having to kind of move us forward in the discussion a little bit is, One, how do you then know if and when you're getting good advice versus unhealthy advice, right? And then what do you suggest people do then if they find that they don't think they're getting the right advice?
By their fruits ye shall know them. And if there's a leader or a therapist or whatever, there's people that follow them and follow their counsel. How are those people resonating? Are they resonating in shame? And like, for example, many of the people who followed Jody resonated in this place of fear and control and a complete lack of healthy masculinity and femininity. And so that they acted as if they're following her and getting healthy, but you could feel that energy. You could totally sense it. Right. And so if you're like, okay, I'm paying for the next session here, I'm going to the next group, that's a person who's been in this group for a year and there's 5 of them and they all kind of have that same feeling. Is that what I want to go become? Is that what I'm working toward? Right. So rather than just going to the next session and drinking in everything she's saying, actually kind of look at what are we doing here? What are we working toward? Right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So that's definitely one way of being able to kind of discern, okay, like I can see, you're basically saying see the bigger picture there.
See the bigger picture.
And then you're also saying you're going off of what you would say is a feeling of energy or a feeling of I might call it
gut.
Your gut feeling.
Trust your gut.
You got to go with that gut feeling. And this is true for anything, really, right? Whether it's a religious thing that comes down, or whether it's something that comes even from your medical doctor or whatever.
You're right. That's a good point.
At the end of the day, it needs to go through the filter of going through the gut check. And the gut check will then say, okay, there's a difference. Like when somebody says something that you don't like, but you know is true, your gut still goes, yeah, dang, I need to change that or work on that. But when it's not true, something in your gut goes, I don't know about that. Like something's not quite right there.
Yep.
And I think it would be.
But Tyler, the next thought is, yeah, but you don't know. They know. They have the experience. So then we discount what our gut says because we don't trust ourselves, right?
Right. When I think that's what I'm suggesting is that when my gut feels off, I should be working with somebody who's willing to have the discussion about why my gut feels off about it. And if all I'm getting back is just do it my way, this is the way I said it,
that big red flag.
There should be room for that dialogue. And if there's not, that's a pretty big red flag, right?
I don't know for you, Tyler, but like for me, if a client came and said, my gut's telling me what you're saying is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would love that. Like I would be like, hey, like, let's talk about that. What is your truth? Because I'm telling you A, and you're saying not A is harmful. I don't want to do that. What's your gut telling you about A? Maybe you need to do B, right?
Yeah.
Now I might come back as the therapist and say, this is what I see. Like I see why you're trying to do B, and I just want to double check with you. Is this your gut, or is this your defense mechanisms? Is this your head? Is it truly your gut saying to do B? Right? Because I am okay if you believe that I'm wrong, and I'm okay if I am wrong, actually. I don't want to force you to go forward in a way that you don't want to go forward, but I'm going to reflect back to you from my job is to reflect back reality to you, and you can make your decision moving forward. Right.
Yeah. I think the clients that we've had over the years, Brannon, that are willing to share that stuff have been an absolute gift.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what we've developed over the years in terms of the treatment that we're doing, in terms of the retreats that we put on, they've been molded and changed in large part because of the feedback that we get from a few people who come to us and say, hey, this was really good, but this part didn't sit well with me, or, oh, this was,
right.
and it's like, oh, well, let's let's think about that. I still think that these principles are true that we're trying to teach, but yeah, this is a good concern. Let me think about that. And we've grown and adjusted, and we will continue to do so with the feedback we get from people that are willing to give it to us. Right.
Well, I'd like to think, Tyler, and this is us tooting our own horn, but it really comes down to what is our intention in doing this work. And my intention is to try to help people. It's not to try to be God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a power play to me. And because of that, then I can actually listen to the feedback. And sometimes that feedback comes in and it's like, I can see where that's coming from for that person. But we've also gotten other feedback that is awesome. Like, that's good. Let's keep that. But we listen to the feedback, right?
Yeah. I think it's that give and take in a relationship that becomes really valuable, even with a therapist. That, some therapists like to put themselves up on that pedestal of, I am the expert, I have all the answers, and they do have some answers and they do have some expertise. But if there's not room for that humanness between the two of you, number one, they can't be continually progressing as a therapist, but also that's part of the exercise here. I remember sitting in a group one time and I was going a certain direction with the group with a guy's project that he was presenting. And I was kind of like, I had my own angle on it and I was really looking at it, in a certain way. And then all of a sudden one of the other guys across the group was like, just one of the participants raised his hand. He's like, hey, Tyler, like, I think you're totally missing this. Like, why we need to do this and this and this instead with this guy. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right, bro. Like,
thank you.
Let's go that way. Let's try that. Right. But I should also, as a therapist, then be willing to come back and say, and I'm still seeing this, this, and this, and you can take it for what it is. And I don't know if I think we're both this way a little bit. We like being able to give what we think we see, knowing that we might be wrong. And we both value that at the end of the day, and I think you should be working with an expert that values this too. At the end of the day, our clients get to make their own choices and they get to live with their own choices.
Yep, they get their consequences.
Right.
Right.
It's not on us to control, manipulate. Like, at the end of the day, we value agency as a top priority. And so every one of us should run it through our system and make a choice.
That's another thing I see with therapists sometimes, is where they overstep their bounds. Where my job is not, as a therapist, it's not to do it for you, where I'm so important and I'm going to give you this system to do it for you. That's not my job as a therapist. My job as a therapist is to provide some tools, reflect back some reality, push where I need to push, love where I need to love, and help you learn how to do it for yourself, whatever it is, whatever you want to create in your life.
Yes.
Right. I'm not that important. Really, like, your healing is about you and your relationship with God. And my job and my calling is to be a guide in that, and to be a part of that puzzle. But I am not, it is not about me.
Yeah.
Right?
I like what you're saying there, Brannon. You're bringing in another piece of this that I think is extremely important, being at least the way that our practice here is a Christian practice. So we are open about developing and wrestling with relationship with God. But what you're saying is that whoever you're working with, they're just one place of receiving information, feedback, some type of reflection. But at the end of the day, whatever you get back from whoever you're working with gets to be run through your filter with not only your values, but your relationship with a higher power.
Yeah.
And I think that relationship with a higher power that we constantly wrestle with becomes a really important, like, it's like, have you seen those gravity filters for water where you go up in the mountains and you scoop the one bag of the dirty water, and then it has a filter there and then a hose with another filter and then another filter, and then you get clean water at the end? It's like that wrestle with God and the relationship with the higher power is maybe the most potent filter of all the information you get. So you go to therapy, you get this bag full of water and it's got lots of good stuff. It's got maybe some sustaining stuff in it, but it needs to have some of the impurities kind of filtered out, that's the relationship with God. That then I go back and go, okay, Tyler was right about this and this and this, but my values say this doesn't quite fit for me. Okay, I can take the truth with my relationship with God, and now I can decide what I want to do with it.
Right. Tyler, when you have that relationship, that confidence, and that real filter, that way to discern, and actually stand in truth and know what it is, all of a sudden lab coat isn't that scary anymore. The lab coat, does that make sense? The therapist,
the Milgram
or
study
whoever,
you're talking about.
Yeah, the therapist or the authority figure or whatever, they're just kind of feedback in the whole equation. But you can stand on your own 2 feet. That girl who spoke up in class that day, she stood on her own 2 feet. She knew herself. She knew it didn't feel right inside of herself, and she spoke up. It's kind of a catch-22, because you do therapy, you have so much shame, you don't know where you stand with God, you don't know who you are, and at the same time, if that therapist is coming at you with stuff that's pushing your integrity, I think some of the most therapeutic things you can do is to actually stand up against your therapist. Sorry, all the therapists that are listening, but a good therapist will love that.
They'll welcome that.
Because they'll see you stepping into your strength, your honesty,
trying to find your truth.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about in a belligerent, manipulative way, because we deal with that all the time too, Tyler. And that's very different. Being defensive, defiant, not being open at all to anything, prideful, like that is not standing in your truth. That's very different than acting from your gut, and discerning what truth is, right, Tyler?
Yeah, I think meeting things with challenge and curiosity combined is a great way of doing things. And I'm thinking of a really good friend of yours who was a long time ago, maybe a client of yours, who every session was like him challenging everything you said. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
Well, I call it wrestling with a bear.
You see him on your schedule every week, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go wrestle with the bear right now. And you know what? That's how he got better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was talking to him the other day, and the truth is it was beautiful, because he would use those therapy sessions to wrestle, and he would use me to kind of challenge things and push things, and he would go, and this was beautiful, because afterwards he would go process it, figure it out, and it wasn't always him coming back and saying, yeah, I agree with you, but a lot of times it was. So it felt like in those moments, like, oh, but a lot of times he's like, no, I'm okay with that now. Like, that works for me. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the way that he would do that is he'd push against, and I actually appreciated that. Because I knew he would do work beyond just fighting with me. I knew that he was trying to actually get to truth.
He wasn't just fighting with you. He
wasn't.
He was wrestling for something bigger, and you just happened to be part of the press that was part of that process that he was engaged in trying to find the truth.
Yeah. He was just lucky that he found a therapist that could just kick his ass. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah. I wouldn't say I won every one of those battles.
No, and probably for the better for you and for him.
Yeah, he taught me a ton.
Yeah. You didn't. You probably, if you would have won all of those battles, that would have been actually probably ineffective.
Yep.
That would have been you in the lab coat.
He's more honest than the guy that just lays down completely, or the woman that just lays down and like, yeah, just tell me everything.
Yeah.
Right. And when I saw people lay down for people like Jody, man, the damage that happened.
Yeah.
And, when she wasn't totally living these principles of truth, and then she was guiding people off the cliff, it's just horrible to see. So, somebody like the person, like the client we're talking about that I was working with, wouldn't have hung with her for very long. Right. He would have stood up in his integrity and been like, no, we're going to find somewhere else.
Hey, the values don't line up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had this funny discussion a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about kind of a similar principle to what we're talking about right now in group. And there's a couple of guys in my group that I know just like they're doing so well in their recovery, but they've fully gone in on drinking the Kool-Aid on like what we call our wholehearted principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And almost to the point that I said this in group and I was laughing with them. I said, look, there's a couple guys in this room that if I told them to go down to Walmart with one of those board signs and no clothes on underneath, it's just like I'm a porn addict, they would do it tomorrow, right? They would do it tomorrow. And then I went on to point out like that wouldn't be healthy, right? Like you would need to take whatever I say or whatever everybody else in this room says, and you need to run it through your value system,
Yes.
and then you need to make your own choices. Like even though
Right.
you trust me, like we built a relationship of trust over time with a couple of these guys I'm talking about, partially because the things that we've talked about have brought them more happiness in their lives.
Right.
Right. But it doesn't mean that everything that I say is still gospel.
Right.
It
Right.
means I'm still
Yep.
wrong about stuff. That's what I look at, like in all these figures too, and like go back to the beginning, what we talked about. Take whatever happens with Tim Ballard or whatever happens with Maurice, or this is interesting that in any of those cases, all of us have good and all of us have bad, and I don't like anyone who throws out all the good when there's some of the bad, as much as
Mm-hmm.
I don't like everyone just accepting only the bad and not the good. Right? It's like they're both.
Right.
And
Right.
and I think that's the
I
middle
think,
ground that most of us we have a hard time living there.
well, we have a hard time living there when that person is coming and saying, I am the power figure, I am the authority, and it's all good, right?
Yeah.
It's all good. So follow me. And I think it's important for us to say, I want to hear your good. I want to learn from you. And I'm not going to buy into that your shiz doesn't stink at all, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are a human. You can make mistakes. You will be wrong at times. And it's healthy for me to know that and then do my own discernment, and not in a prideful way, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. A lot of it, Tyler, has to do with just, I believe inside of all of us, innately, we have this ability to know truth. And when I was younger, I had a church leader really lead me astray, and again and again, and I just thought, it was my mission president, and I just thought, well, I just need to do this. I just need to do it. I just need to do it because he's the authority, right? And this is where I really learned this lesson, where another church leader came in and basically called him to repentance and said, like, what you're doing is wrong and not okay. And it confused me because I was like, I'm supposed to just follow this guy. And I had a companion go into my mission president and say, what you're doing is wrong. I'm not going to do it that way. And I just thought, that's nuts. Like, what? And he got relegated to like some area where, whatever. But he actually stood up in that moment as a 19-year-old kid, and spoke up to a seasoned leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that lesson then. Like, I'm all about trusting. Like, trust is good, but you have to earn my trust. And you don't earn my trust by the position that you have, whether you're a mission president, therapist, this, that, or whatever. You earn my trust by earning my trust.
Yeah.
And you earn my trust by me discerning that, right?
Yeah. And by whether or not our values overlap with one another enough to go, yeah, I can trust that you're going to give me advice that lines up with my values, right? So there's a
Right.
difference between respecting a position of authority. You can still show respect,
Sure.
but trust comes through the relational development of consistent effort and action over time, and two people who are developing a relationship based off of mutual values.
Yes. Yep. That's it.
Right.
So this is a good discussion, Tyler. I hope it's helpful for some people. I and I'll speak for both of us. I don't want people to trust us blindly. I was listening to an episode of ours from like 2 weeks ago, and I was listening to the advice I gave and the things I was saying, and I just thought, what am I doing in that episode? Like that's just bad. Like, I'm totally turning the guy off and like not listening to him and not like, it's just like I was on one that day. It just wasn't good. My content was horrible that day,
Everyone's like, what episode is that?
now other episodes I'm like, dang, like I'm spot on. That's good. But like that day I was like, what? Right. So like, yeah, we're imperfect. We make mistakes. And I don't want that blind trust from people. I want them to be able to step into their own truth.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's the one gift that we have as human beings, is that we have our own choice, our own heart, our own agency, regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And we look at things, I look at how I handled myself over the last few years, and I want to be different the next time something comes around, where I'm going to follow what my gut and my intuition said, rather than just making decisions based off of people in power saying things. And I think there's value in that. I love what Jordan Peterson says, that when we're honest, when we're nothing but honest, whatever the outcome is the best possible outcome that could possibly be, because we were honest.
Yeah, love it.
So,
love it. That principle holds true again and again and again.
Yep.
Well, Tyler, thanks for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, it's a good one. I'm sure there's probably some things stirring, questions, feelings, thoughts from some of the listeners, and we'd love to hear from you. If you want to come on the show or even send us some messages and give us some feedback, we'd love that. So thank you guys for being here.
We're open to hearing it.
Yep.
So, see you guys.